Thank you. All right. So, folk tales. So, I definitely am not an expert on folk tales. I bought a whole bunch of books and I read their introductions. Does that qualify as an expert? If you want a little bit more in depth, if you know Rabbi Arnie Beanstalk, who is a new member at Temple Israel, he actually studied with one of the masters of Jewish folk tales in Israel during his time learning. So I give like the preview and he'll give a more in-depth dive at some point in the future. But I got interested in folktales similarly to a musical entree. Most of the music I do is liturgy, but some of the music that we introduce into synagogue comes from poetry or putim, which is a liturgical poetry. But of course, when we are teaching music to our children, we're teaching folk songs. We're teaching melodies that might say traditional or folk melody. We're teaching songs that might have a moral or a teaching to them, right? There's all sorts of methodologies in which we transmit not just the actual text of our prayers, but also the meaning, the way to be a good person, the way to think about being a good person, the way to understand the teachings of our ancestors. And the musical tradition is one of those methodologies, and the oral tradition of telling stories is one of those methodologies. Now, folktales are a thing that have been, I would say, somewhat diminished in Jewish education. I hope it stays on again. Okay, great. I will do that if it turns off again. Somewhat diminished in Jewish circles. I think one of the reasons that the world's expert on Jewish folktales was a person of the 20th century has to do with the fact that it's an oral tradition that didn't have the same weight and gravitas as Talmud or halacha or the serious things that the men study together at the table with the book, right? It didn't have a book. It didn't get written down 100 or 200 or 500 or 700 or 900 or whatever hundreds of years ago as our oral law was written down, in the 900s. So it's one of those interesting things that oral law became written. So folktales get passed down through stories, they get passed down through melodies, they get passed down from different communities. So your folktale from Spain might differ from your folktale from the Jews of Morocco, or might differ from the folktales of the Jews of Russia or the Jews of Yemen. But surprisingly, we have a huge number of things in common with the Grimm's brothers, or other kinds of folktales that you might have heard. So tell me, what do you know about folktales? Think back to your Disney days. Think back to really just any kind of stories that you read to your kids, your grandkids, as you put them to bed. What are some of our traditional metrics, our traditional iconography of the folktale? What might you have?
A witch.
You might have a witch. Yeah, what else might you have?
Heroine.
A heroine or a hero. Yeah, so generally if you have a heroine or a hero, they have to go on a quest. Yeah, they have to go on a quest in order to become the hero. Maybe they start off as average, a schlemiel, right? Somebody normal. Somebody just like you or me, somebody you could see yourself, maybe even like the little kid, right? Somebody regular, and they go on a quest. And what might happen on your quest? You have to fight danger or dragons or demons or witches, right? And how in our Disney world might we overcome such monsters? Magic.
Or
Kill them. So some sort of strength of the sword or strength of fighting. Yeah, what else? Courage. Yeah, okay. So we have these methods. We have a person who has a trouble. They go on a quest. They have to slay their demons, whether they are physical or metaphysical. and they come out on the other side. And what is the reward for all good fairy tales? Happily ever after, which usually means that you get the sleeping princess, right? Regardless of whether she wants to be gotten. So interestingly, in some of the Jewish fairy tales, we have similar things. There is like, a princess in a tower who somehow magically gets rescued by the man of her dreams, even though her father is just determined that she is gonna be saved for somebody else that he wants her to marry. And we have a princess who magically falls asleep while the person that is supposed to marry her goes off on a quest and cannot be awakened until he returns from his quest. But one of the differences is that instead of it just being that she's so beautiful and he's so in love with her, she's usually very smart. He's usually very smart. The path to victory is not always through physical strength, but more often through intellectual strength. Even overcoming your demons, the kind of magic used in Jewish fairy tales tends to be godly magic. What might godly magic be? Can you imagine what kinds of words or phrases or names might Jews use to create godly magic? Anybody know the word the tetragrammaton? The tetragrammaton is the four-letter name of God. Yod, He, Vav, He. The four-letter name of God, which we do not pronounce, we substitute Adonai, we substitute Hashem, we substitute all these other names, all these words to protect the sanctity of God's name. Only the high priest on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, would be able to utter the four-letter name of God and pronounce it properly. And even then, as I tell a fairy tale, even then he had a rope tied around his waist attached to the priests behind him so that when he went into the Kadosh, the Holy of Holies, and he uttered the name of God, if he was struck by awe and died on the spot, they could pull him back out because they could not go in because they were not the high priests and had not prepared to enter the Holy of Holies, right? So the name of God is this magic that can overcome all your demons. Sometimes it's an uttered name. Sometimes it's written. So King Solomon has a signet ring, right? We know signet rings from kings, right? It's very important. You sign a document, you put your seal into the wax. The king said it, it happens. What happens on Purim when Haman gets the signet ring and sends out a message on behalf of the king? What happens on Purim? I know you guys know the Purim story. Somebody be brave. Which is also, by the way, a folk tale. It just happens to be in our Bible, so we don't call it a folk tale. What happens on Purim? The evil vizier gets a hold of the power, signs it in the king's signature, and condemns all the Jews to death. And the great heroine has to go through her trials, including approaching the king without permission, making a banquet for him, freaking out and not telling him what she really wants, making a second banquet for him, and finally acknowledging, don't kill my people because I too am a Jew, right? She is a classic heroine. There is not really a happily ever after. We pretend there's a happily ever after, but there's a lot of slaughter that happens. So go back and read your Esther just in case you haven't read the last couple chapters. We do a lot of killing in that. But it's a fairy tale. It is a very common fairy tale. We don't think of it that way because it has been elevated to be written into our holy scriptures, to be read on an annual basis in our calendar on the holiday of Purim, but it is a fairy tale in and of itself. Even the idea that this Shlemiel Hadassah, Shmielet, I don't remember how to conjugate Yiddish, Hadassah, she goes and she hides her Jewish identity and she puts herself forward at the behest of her uncle cousin to become the next queen of Persia, even that is a magical happily ever after. Who here didn't dream of becoming a princess when they were little, right? We all watched, the kings and queens of England get married and their fancy dresses and whatever. This is very popular in America. We have this in our Jewish tradition as well. So if you were already powerful, say a king, what might a fairy tale about you already have the princess, you already have the power, you already have the knowledge because you're the king and you can learn whatever you want. And well, King Solomon is known to be rather smart, rather intellectual. What might your quest be if you are King Solomon? Can you imagine? Territory? Well, that would be a very kingly quest, but this is a fairy tale quest. So what might your quest be as King Solomon? And then I'll tell you the actual story. Any ideas?
Heirs to the throne.
Oh, heirs to the throne. Well, yeah, Solomon has an abundance of heirs, so I guess that could be a problem. Wisdom, yeah. Solomon definitely believes himself to be wise and does seek out wisdom over the course of his life. So the story called The Beggar King, Solomon is seeking a special kind of wisdom, the wisdom of illusion. Illusion. I got to hear this story orally, so if I have a little bit of storyteller mode, I didn't make it up, I'm mimicking. Okay, so The Beggar King, this story, there's a beautiful book called Elijah's Violin. It has, I believe, 36 Jewish folk tales from different times, and this is one of my favorites from Elijah's Violin. During the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, King Solomon kept Asmodeus, the king of the demons, as his prisoner. Now, there's a whole other folk tale about how King Solomon captured Asmodeus, the king of the demons, and why he needed it. But it goes back to the building of the temple, which apparently you could use no metal to cut the stones. If you've been to Jerusalem, you might notice that the stones that hold up the retaining wall, that we call the Western Wall, or part of the Western Wall tunnels, are rather large. I'm not sure how they moved them, let alone how they might have cut them without metal. But King Solomon is commanded to build his temple without the use of metal. And he hears that there is some sort of magical worm that cuts through stone. And he goes to the king of the demons, Asmodeus, to find out this information. And this is how he captures Asmodeus. Now, I can imagine that Asmodeus is not super happy to be kept in King Solomon's jail. So he goes to the king of the demons, his prisoner, to prevent any of the forces of evil, which Asmodeus commanded, from interfering with the building of the temple. When the temple was completed, King Solomon called Asmodeus and told him that he was prepared to set him free if Asmodeus would first reveal a single secret to him. Asmodeus said, "Tell me first, O king, what secret is it that you want to know?" King Solomon said, "Of a great many mysteries I am master, Asmodeus, of language of the birds, of the secrets of the wind, of the mysteries of the ineffable name." That's that tetragrammaton. "But there is one secret that has eluded me so far. That is the secret of illusion. And it is of great importance that I learn this secret, for as king, I often am called upon to distinguish truth from illusion." This might be a good thing for all of us to learn in this day of AI. Asmodeus nodded when he heard these words from King Solomon and said, "I agree, King Solomon, to reveal this secret to you, but I cannot do it while I stand here in these chains, nor unless you surrender the ring you wear, inscribed with the ineffable name. For in the presence of the name, my lips are sealed. When Solomon heard this, he found the words of Asmodeus plausible. For the sake of learning the secret, he had Asmodeus released from chains and surrendered his ring to him. But no sooner was Asmodeus free and in possession of the ring than he flung it a great distance, so that it was soon lost on the horizon and sank into the sea. Then the king of demons approached King Solomon, who stood before him unprotected, and setting one of his vast wings to the heavens and the other to the earth, he picked up Solomon from where he sat in his throne and hurled him hundreds of miles. Now Solomon flew through the air like an arrow, and at last he fell down in a field in a foreign country. When he stood up, he was like a drunken man who had lost his way. Who does not know where he is going or what he is doing? He wandered this way for a long time until he became thirsty, and at last he came to a pool. But when he bent down to drink, he saw his reflection in the water. It was not the reflection of a king he saw, but that of a miserable beggar. For the light had lit up his face, had vanished, and there was no longer a crown upon his head. Overwhelmed with the vastness of his loss, Solomon lay down in sorrow and slept. And while he slept, he dreamed that the evening star, the first to be seen, the very ruler of the heavens and night, fell from its place and sank like a meteor into the sea. When Solomon awoke from his dream, he trembled, for he recognized its meaning. And in the morning he set off in his wanderings, which lasted many years. So it was that, deprived of his kingdom, King Solomon made his way, begging for his daily bread. At first, it is true, he insisted he was king everywhere he went. But those who saw him in rags paid him no attention, and he believed him to be merely another beggar gone mad. Then, after 3 years of wandering, Solomon reached the kingdom ruled by King Ammon. One day, while he stood in the streets of the capital city, the royal cook passed him, bearing baskets laden with food of all kind. The beggar king offered to help carry the baskets, and in this way he found favor with the royal cook. Reminds me a little of Joseph. In many weeks after that, Solomon worked as a laborer in the king's kitchen until one day he pleaded with the cook, who became his friend, to let him prepare the royal meal. The royal cook granted his wish, and Solomon prepared a sumptuous feast. When King Ammon tasted the food, he summoned the royal cook and said, "Who was it that cooked this food? For never before have you brought me such exquisite food." I think I might not like that if I was the cook. This is like an off with his head kind of moment. Okay, let's see what happens. Then the cook admitted that the meal had been prepared by Solomon. And thereupon the king ordered that Solomon alone should prepare his meals. And the head royal cook, Solomon, soon came to the attention of Naamah, the daughter of the king. And before long, Naamah recognized that she loved Solomon and wanted him for her husband. Solomon, too, fell in love with the princess. And at last the day came when she announced to her father that she wished them to be wed. But when King Ammon heard this, he was consumed with anger that his daughter, the princess, should choose a cook for her husband. When princes from all over the world were at her feet. And in his anger, he commanded that the couple should be taken to the desert and left there to die. I mean, I've heard of kings banishing the suitor, but the daughter too? So it happened that Solomon and Naamah found themselves alone in the vast wilderness. They had no supplies of food or water, and the sun overhead was like a fire burning in their bodies. All they possessed were the clothes on their back and the walking stick that Solomon carried with him. But it occurred to Solomon that this staff might serve as a divining rod. And by using it this way, he found an underground stream, which flowed beneath the sand, There he dug a well, which was clear waters from beneath, of the stream filled with fresh water. And it was there that Solomon and Naamah made their home. With the fruit they had found, they sustained themselves. And with the stones they gathered, Solomon built a stone hut in that place. And digging furrows into the earth, he used the waters of the stream to fertilize the land. And there Solomon planted every species of fruit, which was to be found scattered throughout the wilderness, including every variety of cactus which bore fruit. So it was that over a period of years, Solomon and his wife established a home in the desert and turned it into an oasis. Together they were the parents of 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, whom they brought up there. In time, Solomon forgot his life as king and came to think of himself as one who made a home in the desert. Nor did he miss his former life, for his days were full and his nights were peaceful. While as king, he had passed many sleepless nights trying to reach just decisions. In this way, many years passed, 12 in all. Then one day it happened that from out of nowhere a dark cloud covered the desert as far as they could see in every direction, and the rains poured down in great sheets. In the short time, a great wave was rolling through the desert. And when that wave struck Solomon's hut, it tore it to pieces, and it carried off Solomon's wife. And at the same time, Solomon fought off the waters with 1 child in his left arm and 2 in his right. A moment later, another struck them, and at that moment, the child in his left arm was torn out of his grasp. Solomon reached for that child, and in this way he lost the grip on the other 2, so that all 3 children were lost at the same time. Then the world went dark around him, and he was carried a great distance in the current. When Solomon awoke, he found that his arms were in chains. Looking up, he discovered that he had been captured by thieves, who had found him unconscious after the flood. The thieves took Solomon with him and sold him as a slave, but Solomon did not care that this was his fate. He was filled with grief at the loss of his family. So it was that Solomon was sold as a slave to the caravan which brought him across the burning desert, and finally sold him as a slave to a blacksmith in a foreign kingdom. As a slave of a blacksmith, it was the duty of Solomon to work the bellows so that the fire would continue to burn. And since Solomon was a steady worker, the blacksmith soon came to trust and respect him. Now that the blacksmith had a son who wished to become a goldsmith and who was already quite accomplished at this craft, it happened that along Solomon's many skills, he was a highly accomplished goldsmith. Just happens, because every king is trained as a goldsmith. And in his free time, he taught the son of the blacksmith, whose skills grew so considerably, he was able to take possession of the court of the king. Once, when the young goldsmith was visiting his father, he spoke to Solomon, who begged him to let him fashion a treasure for the king. The son agreed, and in this way Solomon came to fashion a golden dove set with rubies, moonstones, emeralds, turquoise, mother of pearl, and diamonds. In the beak of the dove he placed a golden twig, and from the twig he hung 3 golden bells like buds. Now when the goldsmith presented this treasure to the king, he was overwhelmed with the magnificence and the great skill of its creator. He asked the goldsmith how it happened that this treasure was so superior to anything he had previously created. Thank you, chef. Thank you, goldsmith. Then the goldsmith confessed that it had been created by a slave who worked for his father, the blacksmith. So it was that the king ordered Solomon to be purchased from the blacksmith and made chief goldsmith in his palace. I'm not sure if this is a wise thing to keep stepping on the faces of those who have saved you. But when you're a slave, maybe you don't have a choice. In this way, Solomon came to the attention of the king, who recognized that he possessed great wisdom. Little by little, the king came to Solomon to discuss the affairs of the kingdom and seek his advice in matters great and small. Now it happened at the time that the king's daughter was possessed by a dream that haunted her night after night. In this dream, she saw a man climbing into a cave in a cliff that faced the cove shaped like a half moon. She never saw the face of the climber, but as often happens in a dream, her eyes were able to see him as he entered the cave, and she watched him take out of the crevice in the wall a jewel of immense beauty, illumined from within as if by a flame. Now the princess became possessed by the idea that this somehow might make the jewel her own, and while she pined away over it, her health declined, and she refused to leave the chamber in her palace. At last there came a night when she was able to glimpse the face of the man who climbed up to the cliff in this recurring dream, and the face she saw was Solomon's. When the princess reported this dream to her father, the king, he understood once that he must ask his wise goldsmith Solomon to set off on a quest to find this cave and to bring back the jewel his daughter craved so terribly. Nor did Solomon hesitate to undertake this task, but set out at once. And how did he proceed? He remembered that the cove in the dream of the princess had been shaped like a half moon. It was there that she had envisioned the cliff with the cave in its side, which he must seek out. So it was that Solomon journeyed for many years, and at each place he came to, he asked if this was the cove shaped like the half moon. But nowhere had anyone heard of such a place. Then one day Solomon heard a child call out to another in the street, "Let us go to the cave of the half moon." Now, when Solomon heard these words, he could barely believe his luck. And he went to the child and asked him if he knew the way to such a cove. And the boy told him he did, and he led Solomon to that place. When they reached the crescent-shaped cove, and Solomon saw the cliff and the cave in its side, he was delighted, and he gave the child a piece of silver and set off to climb the cliff. It took him over an hour to reach the cave, high up in the cliff, and when he crawled inside, he was worn out. Still, he searched through every crevice in the cave, but he could not find anything resembling a jewel in the dream of the princess. All he found was a rough rock in one crevice, and there was nothing to distinguish that rock from any other. But since there was no other clue, Solomon struck the rock against the wall of the cave, and it broke in two. At that instant, a beautiful, glowing jewel fell from inside the rock. Solomon knew his quest was complete. Putting the jewel in a pouch that was strapped to his body, he lay down in the cave and fell asleep. So tired was Solomon from his efforts that he slept for several hours. When he woke up, he found that the cave was no longer lit from the light outside, for the sky had grown dark. Then Solomon went to the entrance of the cave, and when he looked down, he saw the tide had come in, and that the waters had risen and lapped near the entrance of the cave. Just then another wave came and started to flood the cave. And Solomon realized that he was in great danger of drowning. He clung to the rock as the next wave washed in, and as it started to recede, he threw himself from the entrance of the cave into the waters, and in that way, he was carried a great distance. When the wave at last let Solomon down, he saw that it had returned him to the kingdom from which he had set out on the quest for the glowing jewel. Such luck! With great joy and relief, Solomon hurried to the palace of the king and presented the jewel and reported all that had happened on his quest. And when the princess saw the jewel of her dream, her sadness turned to joy, and her recovery was swift and complete. Now the king of the kingdom was so grateful to Solomon for making possible the recovery of the princess that he told him he could have whatever he wanted. And Solomon told him for the first time his true story, and the fact that he himself was once a great king. So it was that Solomon asked only for his freedom in order to recover his kingdom. The king granted his wish at once and ordered a ship to be made ready and well stocked for the voyage. That night there was a great feast, but when Solomon cut the fish open, he was astonished to find in its belly his own magical ring, engraved with the ineffable name, which Asmodeus had cast into the sea. Solomon rejoiced to recover the ring and placed it on his finger, and in an instant he found himself seated on his throne in Jerusalem, with the demon Asmodeus standing before him. And Asmodeus said, "We have been waiting for almost an hour. O king, tell me, how have you learned something of the secret of illusion?" Solomon was staggered to learn that he had been absent only such a short time. It had seemed like many years to him, but when he asked his ministers, they confirmed that barely an hour had passed since his departure. Then Solomon commanded from his throne that Asmodeus be set free, since he had fulfilled Solomon's request. And no sooner did Solomon say this than Asmodeus flew away, and he was not seen again in the kingdom during the rest of Solomon's reign, in which Solomon demonstrated a wisdom unmatched among men and an even-handed mercy that was remarked upon by all. That is the Beggar King. So what do you notice of this fairy tale? A lot of luck. I have a drink somewhere. I'm looking, there it is. Okay. A lot of luck. What else? Oh, time is relevant. I was wondering, as he woke up after an hour feeling like he had lived, I don't know, like 20 or 30 years, like, right? Like time travel. Does your body feel it, or are you still like only an hour older? You know, we have fairy tales with time travel, and like the person ages, but everybody else around them thinks it's only been an hour, or the man who falls asleep for thousands of years and he doesn't really age very much at all, or not an appropriate amount. It's interesting what would happen physically. Of course, our fairy tale is not interested in what happens physically, only mentally. But, you know, it is definitely a question. What else did you notice?
He progressed by skill each time.
He brought skill, such as cooking, such as goldsmithing, wisdom to help be a good advisor to the king. So he brought his natural talents that he had already as a king, but he also brought talents that were utilitarian in the moment, that helped him to rise through the ranks. You know, ultimately, this beggar, in a very Joseph-like way, goes from being a slave to being an all-powerful advisor to the king, not once, but twice, right? This is, you know, Joseph's story on steroids. Wendy?
I could hear a lot of lyricalness in it, a lot of poetry in it,
Yeah.
a lot of classic literature that maybe comes from some of that as well.
Right. I mean, so obviously this particular iteration is a written out version of an orally told story. When I listened to it by a professional storyteller, it's available on the internet. I can, you know, send Naomi a link or something. You can listen to it. It's slightly different. You know, I don't remember this part or that part. It's like there's voices, but it's slightly. It's clearly the same story. It clearly has the same intention. It clearly has the same kind of lessons, but it has that different orality to it. So you can certainly envision, as grandfather to granddaughter to grandchild to great, 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 telling this story around the fire pit over the generations upon generations, some in Arabic, Judaic languages, some in Aramaic, some in Spanish, some in, right, like all the different languages that the Jews might have spoken at any given time would have a slight twist. Maybe he's a blacksmith instead of a goldsmith, or a goldsmith instead of a blacksmith, or a baker instead of a chef, like who knows? There might be small differences, but the idea that King Solomon learns illusion by becoming the bottom of society and working his way back up to reclaiming his ring is within all of those traditions. So that lyricism I'm going to owe to the particular translator, editor of this book, but the nature of stories, we inherit them in America in 2026 very often through our movies. But certainly we tell stories from real paper books to our children. We tell stories, around the campfire. If you camp out or go to camp, overnight camp, we do have that tradition, even if you're not reading the original Grimm. You maybe watched Grimm on NBC when it was out, right? Like you learn there's a universality to some of these demonic creatures, and frankly, I had never realized that the Jews were part of that universality as well. So that was interesting when I was studying it, yeah.
Also, like you were talking about Hollywood, it also happened on television. The same story, the idea of everything being an illusion and then waking up.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the thing, the one that hit me the most was, I don't know if you ever watched Bob Newhart. The end of the last Newhart show where he wakes up in bed next to his wife from the first Newhart show. He goes, I just had this terrible dream.
Right. Well, guess what? Ecclesiastes said nothing is new under the sun. It wasn't new when Newhart did it either, right? Yeah, I mean, right. It's a very, like sometimes I think that we think it's like the cynical or the easy way out of, for the author, it was all just a dream, or it was a prediction, and now that you know the prediction, you can change the future, right? Like whatever that kind of thing that you have in the TV show or in the movie or in the book even, that you didn't know you were reading the future, and now, I mean, whatever it is. But obviously it's not a new invention. It's a device, a literature device or a storytelling device that comes from early humanity, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so also there's some real humility there, because once he accepts he's a beggar, first he tries to change it, and then he accepts these roles. I think I would have a hard time doing that.
Right. I mean, that's...
Especially if you've been a king, and so he is willing to perform those roles and do what he's supposed to do in that role.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, that like this survival instinct enables him to have a much higher level of acceptance than I think we, sitting in our air-conditioned rooms with a beautiful roof over our head, want to believe. Now, I think if we actually look at the world, we know that there are people living normal lives in war zones. There are people living whatever is a normal enough life. They have children, they get married, they learn education through terrible governments, through famine, but the idea of going from being a king to being a beggar, and like all it took was being hungry for 2 days to like get over it enough to do something about it, I think that does take a certain kind of grit and a certain kind of humility and a certain kind of life lesson. And what I particularly like about this, we know in advance the goal is illusion. So like it doesn't feel quite as contrived that he wakes up at the end. So we know in advance that it's illusion. And we know that it's like Solomon asked for this, right? He didn't do something terrible, and this is supposed to be, like, I don't know, what's the Christmas movie where they go back and, visit themselves? It's a Wonderful Life, thank you. Or Charles Dickens, what Christmas Carol, right? Like, it's not meant to like make him change because he's a Scrooge. It's meant to teach him what he has asked to learn. How many times have you asked to learn something and really not been happy that what you asked to learn was freaking hard? Right? Like, I really want help, but why can't I take a magic pill and make it happen? Like, why do I have to work so hard to learn this thing that I really want to learn, but really don't want to have to do the work to learn? As, the wonderful provider of space in my house for 2 15-year-old daughters and 1 almost 12-year-old son. They don't want to have to do the work to learn, even if they need to do the work to learn, right? So Solomon has that benefit as opposed to like the person that the world is working upon. He has that agency of having asked, but he had no idea the hole he was digging for himself. He didn't know that that's what he was asking for. So as Solomon goes on these, quests, that obviously only one is called a quest, right? We have Solomon, the beggar, who then becomes the cook. We have Solomon, who then has happily ever after literally ripped out of his hands, which I really, really hated that because it's just like, that could happen. That's like real life. That was horrible. I did not like reading about that in a fairy tale. And then he becomes a slave who elevates through this goldsmithing. And then he becomes, then he, as the vizier or as the advisor to the king, goes on his first actual quest. So we have like a 3, and Rabbi Beanstalk told me that fairy tales tend to run in 3s. I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of 3 is. I kind of felt like I could have gotten it with only 2. Like I did not need his wife and children ripped from his body to understand what he needed to learn. But apparently fairy tales need to go in 3s. And so the 3 seems to be important, the 3 things. But what do you feel like is the quest that he kind of like the magic quest, right? Like the magic quest is that he gets the ring and it's God's name that like brings it all back. But what kind of quest when he's actually seeking this cave? What do you think that kind of quest is from the fairy tale perspective? There's no demon. There's no sword fighting. What would you call it?
Personal challenge, survival.
Survival, personal challenge. I might even go with like faith. He believes that the princess's dream is true enough that even when he thinks he's failed, he's like, well, I guess this rock must be it. Let's try breaking it. Right? He just has like such conviction that he has to finish this quest and that it will be okay when he does. And then he finishes the quest. He finally succeeds. He gets to sleep. He has a good night's sleep, and he's confronted with his past trauma of a flood. And somehow he has the bravery, the fortitude, the idiocy to throw himself into the receding wave to give himself the best chance of survival. I don't know, like, how do you know to do that? There's no movie about it. So what do you guys think of the idea of folktales, fairy tales? Was this a good lesson? I mean, like, every rabbi tells stories. They they have a family Shabbat and they take out the book of stories to tell to the kids instead of telling a sermon because the kids don't want a sermon. But this idea that like the folktale as a genre of education, the folktale as a universal, which felt very like, I don't know, like I didn't think we would have like a Cinderella story. That didn't seem like a Jewish kind of topic. Jennifer.
Yeah, the fairy tales kind of is similar to the story of Moshe having the staff for water. So you see similarities between like the Torah and the fairy tale.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So Moshe brings forth water from the rock with the staff, or he opens up the Sea of Reeds for the Israelites to pass on by holding his staff up. And Solomon uses the staff as a diviner. Now, divining in and of itself is like an actual real thing that people do to find water in the desert. I have no idea how it works. To me, it might as well be magic, but I understand from people who live much closer to nature that it is a real thing that you can do to find water in the desert. So yeah, there is like a similarity to Moses in terms of the staff bringing forth water from the earth as if by magic, even though the water, existed. I also love the description that when you're comparing it to the Bible, right? He plants every variety of seed. It's like Adam. It's like the Garden of Eden, right? That he cultivates the land. He makes the desert bloom. It's this beautiful oasis that he and his family live in that is perfect, that I don't even know if it gets visitors, but only is destroyed by God, like the Garden of Eden. Yeah, Linda.
I was just gonna say, you sell yourself short because you are an incredible storyteller.
Oh, thank you.
It's just a fantastic way to learn, rather than listening to somebody give you a sermon about exactly what, it's, at least for me, I just get a lot more out of it.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, I grew up listening to stories. So at camp, they tell a story every Shabbat. We have a beautiful Shabbat song session. We all sit on the ground in a circle. This is at Asrui, where I grew up and where my kids used to go in Wisconsin. And in the middle of the circle, you have like 6 to 10 guitarists all playing the songs that you're singing for Shabbat. And then like at some point in the middle, we all hushed and we sang Ma Tovu. And the director of the camp would come out and walk around the circle and tell a story. And I had some favorites. They always do it without a book. And I never learned how to like story tell without a book, because the secret is clergy get to use the book. We use the Siddur, we use the Torah scroll. We're the people of the book. We're not supposed to be the people of the memorization. So I did not increase my memorization skills. So I always thought like, oh, you can't be a storyteller because you're not going to memorize it. Well, maybe that's why I didn't like go and study a bunch of folk tales. But then I had this idea that, this similarity of passing on, transmitting the tradition through folk music, transmission through poetry, transmission through the folk tales that we tell. So it's just the beginning. Maybe in another couple years, I'll actually read through the whole books that I got and not just the introductions, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what the need is. So there's so many good folk tales. I really, really love that the happily ever after is almost always to do with knowledge. So even if it's a beautiful heteronormative wedding ceremony, it's still like, because she's so smart and they study Torah together ever more. It's like such a much nicer than just she's so pretty and he's so strong and handsome. There's like a there, which I particularly like. I really like that the magic comes from God. There's a demon. I don't know that I believe in demons, but obviously our ancestors believed in some sort of king of the demons, Asmodeus. So nice that we have a way to combat our demons. It's just called God. It's good. It's good. We don't need like magic. We just need God and God's magic. It's nice. The more you study, the more you can combat your demons. It's excellent. Good Jewish learning. And as we go through history, and somebody asked me, I think you asked me if I'm going to tell stories from Chelm. And I said, no, those are like more recent. Those are like 19th, 18th century stories. As we go through history, we move from like, super smart people who are our heroes and heroines to like a little bit of that sense that Jews are very disempowered, right? The idea of the stories of Chelm are these very simple people who have no power in their life, where the rabbi helps them through everyday tasks that they have no capacity to like do. And when you look at like what was shtetl life, what did it mean to live in the Pale of Settlement? You might be the best baker, the best shepherd, the best farmer, but you're at the whim of the Tsarist army, and you just have no idea whether or not the next year is going to be good for you or bad for your town. So that disempowerment is shown through some of the folk tales as well, but always with a heightened emphasis on knowledge, rabbis, learning as a methodology of, levity and survival. So thank you all for coming to our last Beit Midrash of the year.
Thank you so much, Cantor.
You're welcome.
Very enlightening. So much more to read, right? Isn't that great? I'm inspired to learn more.
Yeah, it's an easy book too.
Yeah. We'll have to check and see if we have it in our library already. So with this being the last session of Beit Midrash of this series, we'll start up again after the high holidays. You'll see plenty of emails and things about that. I wanted to gather some feedback from this group that's come to at least one, if not all, of the sessions of Beit Midrash. And to do so, we have a couple ways that you can choose to do that. I'm going to switch to the next screen in just a second. We have a digital version of it. It's an 8-question survey that you can do if you have your phones with you today, and we can help you with that, or we have a paper version. Same questions, just different way to do it. I'm gonna show it to you. This is not just about today's wonderful learning, but of course, all the way back in November when we started. So that was a while ago. I feel like November was a long time ago. So up here we have, just as a reminder, who taught and their topic in each of the months that, some of you have been to many of these, or some of you have seen just today's. So if you're feeling techie today and want to take it on your phone, we have the QR code that you can scan it here. If you're like, I want to try it, but I don't love a QR code, there's directions. You just open your camera, hold it up, and then click the link. And if you're not feeling techie, no worries. We have both Johnny and Sharon here are able to pass out a paper form of it. And I'll also send this out to anybody that's registered for Beit Midrash over the whole series in a couple of days as well. So I really appreciate getting your feedback, asking you how you like to learn, asking you what topics you like to learn about, all those sorts of things, so that we can feel like it was a great series that we've